And I want to link this to another story that's similar and related, but slightly different, more how these influence groups in action, really make it so the United States is not just aiding and abetting, but outright contributing to the military buildup and potential military ascension of the Chinese Communist Party over the United States. I think our scientific elites, epitomized by Fauci, think that science is borderless and, we can collaborate with the Chinese, although they're probably communists, so they don't really care. But the Chinese view science through the lens, not just as a strategic national priority, but it's how they will gain supremacy over the United States. And they treat it as such. There's really no such thing as, non-military use science. It's all part of the same thing. But meanwhile, the United States government, our tax dollars, have been funding hundreds of studies that list as authors members of the Chinese military, individuals and laboratories linked not just to Chinese military capabilities, but to their intel and espionage capabilities. I think an issue we've seen at the forefront recently is talking about rare earths and semiconductors. And the United States Army has actually been funding China's top semiconductor lab. The U.S. Army funded research involving the Chinese Academy of Sciences, the Institute of Semiconductors, the State Key Laboratory of Semiconductor Superlattices and Microstructures. Basically, these labs exist to help China gain an advantage over Western technological supremacy in this field specifically. And the United States Army is literally funding dozens of studies being carried out by those various groups I was mentioning. Similarly, for the semiconductors, the rare earths, you also have things like the State Key Laboratory of Rare Earth Materials, PLA hospitals, doing similar style research. You actually saw multiple U.S. agencies funding these same studies for decades. The U.S. Army, the U.S. Navy, DARPA, Department of Defense, Department of Energy, National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, and other U.S. national laboratories. The rare earth one is particularly interesting because this research has literally helped China gain a 90% stranglehold over basically all the processing of rare earth elements, and I think upwards of 70% of all the rare earths themselves. It's really quite ridiculous. I will have the articles. I know these are probably niche to find for the studio, but you can see the names of these studies. It is very clear that these are military use studies that your tax dollars are funding, very niche weaponized labs run by the Chinese Communist Party, whose explicit purpose in their charters and doctrine is to literally overtake the United States through scientific means. And these are the same materials that we need to use in F-35s and missiles and radar and stuff like that. The same stuff that, the Chinese weaponized against President Trump in his tariff negotiations. And when you look at the shortages, right, that we have that are now impacting our calculus when it comes to what to do in Iran, it really leaves you wondering, right? Is this technological advantages, not just the illicitly obtained ones through IP theft, but this is taxpayer subsidized. Fauci's probably the poster child for that, but in that same vein, obviously, we did a lot of reporting on the Wuhan Institute of Virology, much like QCEF is to the United Front. The WIB is to a much broader network of Chinese labs that were receiving United States taxpayer dollars. That's probably in the thousands, but you look at specifically Army and military linked ones. One of my own investigations showed that the NIH funded over 250 studies involving explicitly PLA, People's Liberation Army researchers. They were either affiliated with the literal military itself or the PLA hospitals or various Chinese military universities. Most of the funding came from NIAID, National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, while it was run by Fauci. But don't miss the forest for the trees, right? On the Wuhan Institute of Virology, this is a systemic problem that plagues our scientific community. And trust me, the Chinese Communist Party loves people like Fauci. They're the best thing that ever happened to them, because when something bad actually happens, what do? They then just amplify Chinese Communist Party propaganda and try to silence shows like War Room, who dare to even ask questions about, well, maybe this was linked to the Chinese Communist Party. And the NIH under Fauci actually signed a formal agreement with a explicitly communist and military-linked Chinese foundation that funds the People's Liberation Army. It was the National Natural Science Foundation of China. Fauci's office basically all went over to China on some really glamorous delegation where they signed this agreement to expand partnerships, to expand funding of research. Through this, they literally funded the Wuhan Institute of Virology, funded PLA researchers, and basically gave the Central Military Commission some of the highest levels of the PLA, of the Chinese military, technology and, patents and information that were exclusive to the United States, no longer, and your taxpayer dollars literally subsidized it.